Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mr. B. Today we have a very exciting show for you. We are discussing the latest developments in the Iran war. As you know, Donald Trump and I believe Israel was planning a major attack on Iran over this past weekend. I think they are at the negotiation tables and he's called it off temporarily. That being said, everything's up for grabs. Not sure why we're in this war, but it is where we are. That being said, let's go ahead and jump right into the latest development with this particular um, war and discuss other news. For this particular show, we're using First Post, which is our relied upon third party publication based out of India. We think they're a valid source, so we tap into some of their developments. So that being said, let's jump right in.
The world's most powerful military, one with a defense budget larger than several countries combined, the mighty military of the United States, has a serious weapons problem. A top commander of the US forces stationed in Europe has sounded a new alarm. Washington reportedly lacks enough weapons to continue protecting Israel from incoming ballistic missiles. This is according to a fresh report by the Washington Post. According to this report, the chief of the US European Command, or the EUCOM, informed Pentagon officials earlier this week that the United States does not have enough naval assets. The military chief further added that America may no longer be able to intercept Iranian projectiles launched towards Israel. The EUCOM operates in the Mediterranean Sea. The wing's warships shoot down missiles launched in Israel's direction from Iran and from Yemen, which are fired by the Iran-backed Houthi rebels. The Washington Post also cited a letter written by the military chief in which he cautions the Pentagon that he will have to choose between defending America over Israel if another Navy destroyer is not deployed in the region under his command. As of now, the United States has 5 naval destroyers stationed in a Spanish port. A 5th one is expected to join later this year. The takeaway? The war in Iran has been depleting America's weapons stockpile. This is not a one-of-a-kind report, though reports of a depleting US stockpile have been doing the rounds for the past few months. But if you ask Donald Trump, all is well in America. He has dismissed such reports. He says America has a lot of ammunition.
Plants are being built. A lot of equipment is being built. The Patriots in particular are being built. The THAAD system is going up. We have a lot. Every one of our contractors is building 4 to 5 plants right now. And we're in very good shape.
But sweeping problems under the rug does not make them disappear, because here's what the numbers say. According to recent estimates, America has used around 1,200 Patriot interceptors from an inventory of roughly 2,330. More than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles out of approximately 3,000. More than 1,100 joint air-to-surface standoff missiles out of 4,400. 40 to 70 precision strike missiles out of 90, and 190 to 290 terminal high altitude area defense or THAAD missiles out of 360. These are not ordinary weapons. These are America's premium inventory, and every launch empties that reserve a little more. The critical munitions used in this war span 2 categories: long-range ground attack systems and the air and missile defenses used to intercept incoming Iranian attacks. The most used ground attack system during this war is the Tomahawk land attack missile. It is typically fired from ships or submarines. It can hit targets well over 1,600 kilometers. And the latest variant of these missiles cost around $2.6 million. According to estimates, the stockpile may not return to pre-war levels until 2031. That's 5 years from now. Let's talk about air defense systems. The most heavily used is the Patriot. It's a ground-based missile used to target aircraft, ballistic and cruise missiles. up to a distance of 160 kilometers and altitudes exceeding 24 kilometers. It is among the finest air defense systems ever built. It costs roughly $4 million each. And here's the irony. America has repeatedly used these costly interceptors to shoot down cheap Iranian drones that cost perhaps $30,000 or $30,000. Economically, it's like paying for a five-star hotel to hide from Iran. Now comes the bigger problem. Defense manufacturing moves at a very different pace. Experts say many advanced missiles require 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years to produce, meaning the missiles arriving today were funded years ago. So the Pentagon cannot simply swipe a government credit card and restock tomorrow morning. War consumes weapons in weeks. Factories replace them in years. That is the problem. And that mismatch is becoming America's Achilles heel. And that is exactly why military planners are worried. Because Iran is just a piece of America's concern. And the real nightmare lies thousands of kilometers away, across the Pacific, Taiwan. For years, American military planners have warned about what is known as the Davidson window. The theory suggests that China could be prepared for military action against Taiwan by 2027. Whether that happens or not, Washington has been preparing for that possibility. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if America reaches that moment after exhausting large portions of its most advanced missile inventory elsewhere? That would just mean an underprepared American force against the vast arsenal of Chinese missiles and aircraft. And here's why this headache will not leave the Trump administration soon. Because the munitions shortfall is not solely the result of the conflict with Iran. It reflects long-term strategic and industrial challenges that have built up over decades. First, post-Cold War planning reduced demand for munitions after Soviet Union collapsed. The US shifted from preparing for a large-scale great power war to planning for a smaller regional conflict, such as those involving Iraq or North Korea. These wars were expected to require fewer weapons, leading to lower procurement and smaller stockpiles. Second, munitions have often lost out in Pentagon budget priorities. The military has consistently prioritized expensive platforms like fighter jets, warships, armored vehicles, because they remain in service for decades and visibly strengthen deterrence. By contrast, missiles and ammunition are stored until needed in combat, making them easier to cut when budgets are tight. And finally, recent conflicts have rapidly depleted existing stockpiles. Unlike the counterterrorism campaigns of the early 2000s, guided weapons. US operations in West Asia following Hamas's attack on Israel, along with continued support for Ukraine, have significantly increased the consumption of high-end munitions. This exposes the gap between military demand and production capacity. Using munitions is not necessarily a bad thing. They exist to be used. But the question facing the Trump administration is whether the risk of a future conflict arising from reduced inventories is worth the gain in the current war. America still possesses unmatched military power. It still has the biggest defense budget in the world. The immediate problem is not money. It's time. The greatest challenge facing the United States right now isn't proving it can project power. It's proving that it can sustain it.
Okay, so the first question is about the ammunition. It's true. At the rate that we are attacking Iran, and we also have to provide weapons to NATO and other countries, conflict zones. You have operations happening with Ukraine and Russia. The U.S. just recently bombed, I believe it was Boko Haram or something like that in Nigeria for persecutions of Christians. And then you have a number of other things happening throughout the world. We're gearing up for a conflict with Cuba. We just essentially invaded Venezuela. All of these projection of strength requires resources and assets, all of which has to be made. And these assets are expensive to build, as well as they take time to actually assemble and put together. And just the demand requires more manufacturing plants and things of that nature for people, contractors to build these out. And we haven't officially declared a war. So on top of building this out, you got to get Congress to approve funding, providing more funding in election year, right? For a war that hasn't been declared yet. So right now, the Trump administration found themselves in a very awkward situation. The more they escalate with Iran, the more Iran retaliates and using far less expensive weapons, attack their core weapons. And now there's a shortage of which these ceasefires happen so that they can rearm themselves to re-attack them. And the problem is, at what cost, right? I don't know that this is wise. Again, I'm against this agenda item for the Trump administration. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it's wise, and I think it will ultimately leave a negative stain on his legacy. But we all have to watch how it plays out.
So while the United States faces a shortage of weapons, it is also looking for ways to make its enemies' weapons less effective. How? By making their weapons miss their targets. That may sound like science fiction to you, but it is already becoming part of modern warfare. Last month, Washington tested a new system. It has a very dramatic name. The system is called the Hammer of the Gods. Now, it does not fire a missile or drop a bomb or destroy a target. Yet, it could make some of the world's most advanced weapons far less effective. The United States has tested the maritime version of this system. For the first time, the trial took place off the US West Coast. This is during an exercise called Project Convergence Capstone 6. It is one of the US military's largest experiments for testing new battlefield technologies. To be clear, the system has already been tested on land for the past 2 years. But this was its first demonstration at sea. And that is an important signal. It means Washington wants this technology to travel with its Navy. Why? So that its warships can disrupt enemy weapons even far from shore. So what exactly is the system, and how can it stop a weapon without firing a single shot? Tonight we're going to decode it for you. Let's start by understanding how many modern weapons find their targets. Take a cruise missile or a long-range drone, for instance. After it is launched, it has to know where it is and where it is going. It cannot do that by itself, so the missile has to depend on satellites. The best-known example is GPS, that is short for Global Positioning System. It acts like a digital map, telling the weapon its location, as well as helping it stay on course. Now imagine that map suddenly becomes useless. The weapon is still in the air, but it no longer exactly knows where it is. That can make it drift off course, miss its target, even fail to hit it with the intended accuracy. That is the principle behind Hammer of the Gods. It does not shoot down a missile. Rather, it tries to confuse it. The system disrupts the navigation signals. The US military calls these positioning, navigation, and timing signals, or PNT. You do not need to remember the term. Just think of them as these digital directions that help a missile or a drone.
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44. A
sophisticated weapon can become much less effective. The United States says the system is designed to interfere with guided missiles, cruise missiles, long-range artillery, and other precision-guided weapons. But the system has another role. It is designed to help US forces stay connected. This is so that they can communicate, coordinate, and operate even when the electronic environment is heavily disrupted. That is a difficult balance to achieve, because the same signals that an enemy depends on are often used by your own forces as well. And systems like this do not appear overnight. They are a response to what militaries have been watching in recent wars. Look at Ukraine, for example. The conflict has shown that some of the most effective defenses do not always involve shooting down a missile. They involve making sure it never reaches its target. Both Russia and Ukraine have repeatedly used signal jamming to disrupt drones, interfere with navigation, and break communication links. In many instances, the weapon was still in the air. It simply could not find its way. And that has caught the attention of militaries around the world. The United States is not alone in developing such technology. Russia has long deployed electronic warfare systems. This includes the Krasukha 4 and Pol 21. Meanwhile, China is also investing in mobile electronic warfare units. And that tells you how warfare is changing. Success will not simply depend on who builds the most advanced weapons, but also who can make those weapons lose their way. Now, there's one thing the last few years have proved. Drones are no longer the future of warfare, they are the present. From Ukraine to Iran, drones have reshaped the battlefield. So countering them is one of the biggest headaches for militaries around the world. But India is confronting this challenge head on. It has been building anti-drone systems for years now. And in the latest development, the Indian Air Force is equipping its helicopters to hunt down drones. Here's our report.
What comes to mind when you think of anti-drone systems? Perhaps it's an anti-drone gun, the big rifles carried by soldiers to shoot drones down. Or maybe you imagine something like a missile interceptor battery, with small interceptors that are economical. Well, India already has these systems. Now it's moving on to test another form of drone defense, a mobile aerial drone destroyer, and one that utilizes existing hardware. India is now planning to turn its existing helicopters into anti-drone specialists, and the concept is already being tested. The Indian Air Force just concluded Exercise Rotor Clap 3.
The drills took place at the Pokhran Field Firing Range in Rajasthan.
The IAF deployed Mi-35s,
Apache AH-64Es, and the indigenous Prachand attack helicopters.
developed by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. The choppers were all taking part in the Counter Unmanned Aerial System, or CUAS, exercise. But it wasn't just attack helicopters practicing their drone defense maneuvers. The Indian Air Force decided to bring other types of helicopters into the fray as well, most notably the Mi-17s. Mi-17s are usually classified as transport helicopters, but during the drills, the Indian Air Force used them to fire a barrage of unguided rockets. This is reportedly a technique used by Russian forces to counter Ukrainian drone swarms, and it turns what is usually a transport helicopter into a secondary anti-drone unit. India used several transport and utility helicopters during the Rotor Clap 3 drills, alongside the Mi-17s. India's Chinook and Dhruv helicopters were also taking part in the exercise. And the Indian Air Force isn't done here. It has a wish list to make its helicopters even better at defending against drones. During a seminar hosted by the IAF and the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers, the Air Force laid out its plan. The IAF wants to equip helicopters with micro-missiles. These should be designed to engage slow-moving targets like drones. The IAF also proposed warheads with steel pellets. These should blow up when in close proximity to a hostile drone, and the pellets can then take out everything in a 25-meter radius. The IAF also wants forward-mounted guns on the choppers. It wants AI-enhanced target identification systems, and it wants jammers, both GPS and airborne radio frequency jammers. These should be lightweight so they can be carried aboard helicopters, so they can be used to disconnect drones from their operators mid-flight. The Indian Air Force wants to add all these features to its anti-drone helicopters. It has not specified which choppers will be chosen for the role, but Exercise Rotor Clap 3 should help the IAF figure out which are best suited to become drone hunters. By using helicopters, India will move to aerial and drone warfare. It already has land-based counter-drone systems, but these systems have limitations. Anti-drone guns pose a risk to the soldier carrying it. Stationary ground platforms can have their location targeted, and sometimes low-flying drones may bypass land-based radars. Using helicopters adds another dimension to India's anti-drone defenses. better preparing it to counter modern drone warfare.
States has done something rare. Donald Trump's America First administration has jumped in to save another country's currency. The United States has bought Japanese yen for the first time in nearly 30 years. It's a rare bilateral intervention, and it was done to prop up the Japanese currency from its 40-year low against the US dollar. The first clue that the US could intervene? It came during a Trump administration cabinet meeting last week. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was pictured with a note saying, "To do, buy Japanese yen." The deal was announced on Sunday, and Donald Trump has called it a signal of friendship.
Japan wanted to, it was really more than anything else, it was a signal of friendship. Because the yen is weakening and the dollar is doing great. The fact is, our country is doing great. Everybody wants help from our country.
But why would the United States intervene to save another country's currency? Well, because the yen has not been having a great time. Japan is the world's fourth largest economy, yet it has been struggling with a weak currency for years. But why? Back in the 1990s, Japan's economy entered a long period of stagnation. Prices refused to rise. People stopped spending. Businesses stopped investing. Economists call this deflation. To revive the economy, Japan slashed interest rates to almost zero. At one point, they even went below zero. Imagine a bank so desperate that it practically pays you to borrow money. The idea was simple. Cheap loans would encourage people to spend. Businesses would invest. Growth would return. Instead, Japan got addicted to cheap money. Fast forward to today. While America and Europe raised interest rates to fight inflation, Japan kept them relatively low. Money naturally flowed where returns were higher. Investors sold the yen, bought dollars. The yen kept falling. It's financial gravity. Money always rolls downhill towards higher profits. Then comes another problem, energy. Japan imports almost most of its oil and gas. When energy prices rise, Japan pays the bill. And thanks to disruptions in West Asian energy supplies amid the conflict in Iran, those bills ballooned. A weaker yen made things worse because every barrel of imported oil suddenly became more expensive. The government responded with subsidies, essentially writing giant checks to soften the pain. But the governments don't have magic wallets, they borrow, and Japan has been borrowing for decades. Today, Japan's public debt, which is the total amount of money a government borrows to pay for its expenses, is more than twice the size of its entire economy. An aging population makes things harder. So America stepped in, like any good ally would. But think about it for a second. Donald Trump going out of his way to help another country's economy. That's about as surprising as Gordon Ramsay complimenting burnt toast. Economics has plenty of unwritten rules. Here's one of them. When your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't usually pay to rebuild it, unless your own house is about to catch fire too. That's the case with America. So what's Trump's agenda actually? You see, Japan has been trying to strengthen the yen by buying its own currency. But to buy yen, Tokyo needs cash. Where does that cash come from? By selling something valuable. In this case, US government bonds. Countries buy them because America promises to repay them with interest. Japan owns a mountain of them. To be precise, it is the largest foreign holder of US government debt. If Japan starts dumping those bonds in large quantities, America suddenly has a problem. Too many bonds for sale push prices down. When prices fall, interest rates rise. That means Washington must pay more to borrow money. Imagine your bank suddenly saying, your home loan interest just doubled because someone else sold their investments. Painful, isn't it? Now multiply that by trillions of dollars. America's borrowing bill shoots up. That is something the Trump administration would rather avoid. Consider this. Japan has reduced its US Treasury holdings by $96 billion this year. So instead of letting Japan sell more US bonds, America simply helps Japan strengthen the yen directly. There's another reason. Currencies are like seesaws. If the dollar becomes too strong, American products become expensive overseas. exports suffer. Meanwhile, a weekend gives Japanese exporters an advantage. Washington doesn't want that imbalance growing further. And then there's the friendship factor. Trump sees Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi as an ideological ally, which demands another question. How unusual is it? Going by history, it's very unusual. Actually, major economies usually avoid manipulating currencies unless there is an urgent need. We only have a handful of examples. Let's begin with Japan again. The year was 1998. The United States and Japan jointly bought yen during the Asian financial crisis. Washington stepped in because instability in Japan threatened the global economy. Then we have the Plaza Accord of 1985.
I built this website in 5 minutes with Wix Harmony. So I came across this image recently and thought to myself, what if I built an entire
compete again. The latest example is Argentina. In October last year, the US bought billions of Argentinian pesos. This happened weeks before a vital election for the country's right-wing president, Javier Milei, another ideological ally of Donald Trump. Now, will Trump's latest move in Japan work? According to analysts, in the short term, yes. The yen has already climbed to its strongest level in 3 months. But mission accomplished? Not quite. Japan still has slow growth, massive debt, an aging population, expensive energy imports. Those problems don't disappear because Washington bought a few $1 billion worth of yen. Markets know that, which is why many analysts believe this rally may only be temporary. There's another risk. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is promising tax cuts, huge investments, more defense spending, and economic revival. It sounds ambitious, but investors want to know who is paying that bill. So what are we really witnessing here? A rescue mission, a strategic investment, or simply America protecting its own wallet? Probably all three. Whether this intervention fixes Japan's economy or not is a discussion for another day. For now, Trump has hit 2 targets with 1 arrow. Takaichi got a little breathing room, and America, a better bond market.
Okay, for this particular segment, I want to weigh in on it. We live in a global economy and things are interconnected. So the U.S., in order to raise money to fund wars and do all these different things, they sell treasury bonds. The treasury bonds they sell are purchased by a lot of Asian investors. Japan, China, a lot of these tend to own a big portion of our treasury bonds. If their currency is low, that means they have less buying power. And the less buying power they have, the less bonds they can buy. We're in active conflict. We need them purchasing. So the U.S. officials who analyze these things for a living have been able to see that there's been a decrease in the amount of bonds that they're purchasing. So that is not good, especially if you're in the middle of a conflict. Then on top of that, their buying power has diminished. And now they have other economic factors that is contributing towards, some hardship with their economy projected to come, right? They have an aging population. There isn't a lot of new births being born there. And they've actually been reallocating a lot of their funding or a lot of their money towards military investment. So that's taking money away from buying things like treasury bonds and things of that nature. So it just spells bad news, especially when you're fighting an unpopular war and not helping an ally country that owns a good number, if not the most, treasury bonds that you have would mean that they would be in a place of desperation and they would have to offload the bonds, exactly as the analysis stated, which is 100% true. Now, once they unload the bonds, it now means that the U.S. would have economic woes and the price of things will go up. And, when you're trying to fund a war and tell everyone everything's okay and the U.S. is in the best possible position and these things are happening, it does not bode well, especially as you approach an election year. So the U.S. administration, although it seemed like they did a good deed for an ally, they had hidden motives behind why they did it, some of which was touched upon through that analysis. But at the same time, it also spells out some of the risks connected to a global economy, right? Even if one country's struggling and you think it's none of your business because that's not your country and it doesn't matter, well, if that country holds a lot of your debt, then it does matter, because if they offload the debt or demand repayment on the debt and you're not in a position to do so, now it creates conflicts with your budgets, and you have to reallocate resources in order to even meet the payment requirements. So did Trump do it out of good heart? Was it a good faith gesture, or did he really have no choice but to do it? Because if he did do it, the pain points would have been, if he didn't do it, the pain points would have been worse than if he did. So yes, good gesture, but there's a lot of other motives behind why it was done in the first place. Let's continue.
You all know that US President Donald Trump has no problem picking fights with friends. Even America's closest allies have often been in the crosshairs during this Trump administration. Being members of the same military alliance, historical friendships, or even personal equations, none of that matters to Trump when he gets in the mood. He'll fight anyone. But somehow, France seems to have a memo, because it did something to annoy the United States. It criticized the Americans at the United Nations. A few days ago, the UN was voting on whether to extend the tenure of Volker Turk. He is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Most countries wanted him to continue. The United States did not. But this time, the United States did not get its usual veto. The matter was put up to the UN General Assembly, and Turk got his extension. That should have been that. But the US wasn't going to take this quietly. The US mission to the UN put up a post whining about his extension. Not the most graceful act. France in particular was not impressed. So the French mission to the UN put up a scathing reply. It pointed out that there were only 10 nations that voted against Turk's extension, and the US shared its position with North Korea, Nicaragua, Mali, and Russia. France then said that the United States was no longer a beacon of human rights, and the world no longer listens to it. This was a direct challenge to Washington's hegemony. While it's arguable whether US ever was a beacon of human rights, what's not up for debate is that no one really talks to the United States like that. France insulted the United States. What's more, it insulted Trump's America. That was bound to have repercussions. It started with a relatively restrained reaction. The US delegation walked out of a UN Security Council meeting when the French ambassador took the floor. Then the US official berated France.
This disingenuous grandstanding is tiresome, but we have tolerated it out of a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect as P5 members. As such, we will not be affording them the benefit of listening to their politicized drivel until they renounce their condescending and disrespectful rhetoric and behave in a manner commensurate with their seat on this council.
Washington issued a rebuke, and it did not stop there. After all, restraint is not Trump's strong suit. True to form, Washington seems to have doubled down. It is now threatening to block the appointment of France's new ambassador to the United States. Reports say that French President Emmanuel Macron has already filed the paperwork. The appointment was expected to take place by September, but now it's up in the air. Does this seem fair to you? Now, you could say that France started this, but why target the ambassador who has nothing to do with this? It seems like collective punishment for the French diplomat apparatus. Perhaps the French mission did not think things through. Maybe it thought that historical allies like the United States and France could be frank with each other. Or maybe it assumed that because Macron and Trump speak regularly, the fallout wouldn't be this bad. If that was the thought process, it was clearly flawed, because Trump has been happy, to aggravate his allies since coming to office. Look at the recent history. In his second term, Trump has picked a fight with Denmark. Trump insisted that he had to have Greenland. The issue threatened to destroy NATO. Then there are the constant tariffs on everyone, friend and foe alike. Tariffs have been a thorn in Europe's side since Trump's return to office. Europe and everyone else, of course. But perhaps the most absurd fight Trump picked recently was with Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. For some reason, Trump thought it was a good idea to mock Meloni, to humiliate her by saying she was desperate for a picture with him, and then adding salt to the wound by saying he took the picture because he felt sorry for her. Meloni was furious when she found out, and she immediately debunked Trump's claims.
Some things deserve an immediate response. Donald Trump's statements are completely made up. Frankly, I am stunned. I do not know why the President of the United States behaves this way toward his own allies, although this is certainly not the first time it has happened.
During her rebuttal, Meloni pointed out that Trump has regularly mistreated his allies, and this was from a leader once called the Trump whisperer. The Trump administration seems to treat America's allies like vassals, especially the European ones. So any rebuke was always likely to be treated like insubordination. And the American backlash reflects this. This episode with France and all the other recent ones with Europe seem to validate a saying attributed to the late Henry Kissinger. It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal.
Okay, in this latest segment, I'd like to weigh in. I think this little rift that's happening between the Trump administration and NATO officials and NATO leaders has been a long time coming. Now, while we can criticize that maybe it is a little petty for Trump to go to such extent to prevent a confirmation of one of French's elected UN officials, I actually think it's a valid move. The reason why is because oftentimes countries think that just because they are allies, they can disrespect us, right? That's not to say we have to agree on everything. Like, I don't take issue with the fact that a lot of NATO countries did not agree with the plan for the Trump administration to attack Iran. I agree with them in choosing to stay out of that conflict because even though we are allies, they didn't see the justification for that war. I agree with them. And I think there are times when they have valid reasons to push back against the Trump administration. But there are also times when they are taking jabs. Now, the facts are a lot of these European leaders were buddy-buddy with Barack Obama, and they supported him. And Trump and Obama are nemesis. They're enemies. They're not friends. And when there was a time to choose between the Democratic camp and the Trump administration, a lot of those allies were insulting Trump, and they were really trying to belittle him. They were trying to make him feel like an outsider, even prior to him winning. And when he won, they had to tolerate him, so they went to kiss the ring. Then when there was another election, they were trying to undermine him in 2020 with Biden, and they used the whole timeline with Biden's administration to potentially attack Trump, whether indirectly or directly, right? By making snarl remarks and things of that nature. Trump is not a guy historically that has ever forgotten the people that have been enemies to him. So even though he may invite them over and make them kiss the ring, he remembers that these people aren't really his friends. And those moments get showcased when they do things like this. And the things they did was almost in a way make his administration seem incompetent for decisions that they may have made, or they've taken slight jabs thinking that just because they're allies, they're entitled to humiliate, insult, or, take jabs at the president's administration. And so when he does it back, the pushback or the reaction to him reacting to their slight against him is that somehow he's being petty and he should be above it all. I don't agree with that, actually. I really don't. I do believe that there should be fundamental consideration on the part of our allies to weigh in the cost of said decisions. If you're going to make an insult, be prepared to what comes with it, right? There was a point in time also, there's a lot of elephants in the room, right? There's a point in time where Trump was trying to get a peace deal between Ukraine and Iran. And during that time, Zelensky was running to NATO, and NATO was pushing still for the conflict, right? That is undermining the Trump administration's attempt to get a peace deal. Yet they did it anyway. Now, Trump, out of obligation and due to the fact that some people in Congress went ahead and tied his hands, where he can't just walk away from NATO because they've sort of worked it into law where Congress now has to agree for the U.S. to do it. Trump now knows he's got to deal with these people, but it's not because he wants to. He tolerates them, right? He'll sell them weapons. He'll, make them feel some sense of appreciation. But at his core, Trump resents them. When he is in a conflict, they don't come to his aid. But when they're in conflict and they need support and they need help and they need assistance and they need intelligence and they need stuff, they come and fully expect for us to help. When they're expected to pay their bills for our support and helping them militarily with the NATO contributions, they weren't really meeting the requirements, their pledge that they made to, I think it was 2%. And it wasn't until he really pressed the issue and threatened to walk out of NATO that they actually did. And there was still some straggling countries who refused to pay their fair share, i.e. Spain. So you have all this tension that takes place between the Trump administration and these European leaders, all of which were really buddy-buddy with Barack Obama, right? Macron was buddy-buddy with Barack Obama. He'll come and kind of kiss the ring, but in reality, Trump he's not disillusioned into believing that Emmanuel Macron is his ally, is his friend, actually wants to see him succeed. And as is the case with a lot of these other European leaders. This is like what happens when you see a tense relationship in action. And what you're seeing is that Trump just doesn't take it on the chin. Now, for people who don't follow this and who just gets the sound bites and the clips, you will jump to the conclusion that maybe Trump is petty and that's just his style. I'm not saying that everything Donald Trump does is correct. There are things that he does that's meant to kind of snuff these people and to kind of belittle them from the big head that he believes that they've established. And while that may not necessarily be what you would expect, it's his style. It's how he does things. And I think for a lot of people, they celebrate that about him, that, hey, if you're going to slight us, don't be surprised if you get a reaction from us on a similar level. And I think that's what you're starting to see. So in this case, I think if they're going to be bold enough to be condescending and take jabs and do petty stuff, he's within his right. And until they realize that all those actions comes with a reaction, and that they should be more mindful of the decisions they make and the repercussions that comes from it, then I think he needs to do it just to make sure he draws the line and ensures that there's a level of respect that's real and not pretentious. All right, moving on.
India's biggest airline is about to complete 20 years of operations tomorrow, and it has a new man to lead it. His name is Willie Walsh. He has spent decades in aviation industry and is known for taking tough decisions. He now formally takes charge of Indigo. This comes at a time when the airline is facing operational challenges, rising costs, and growing competition. So can the man who helped reshape some of the world's biggest airlines keep Indigo ahead of the curve? Our next report explores.
20 years ago, one airline set out to solve one problem. How do you make flying affordable for millions of Indians? It discovered a solution: low fares, simple operations, and constant efficiency. That formula worked. Today, that airline is India's biggest airline. We're talking about Indigo. It controls around 66% of the domestic market, operates more than 440 aircraft, and flies over 2,200 flights every day. But success has changed the challenge. The question is no longer how to become India's largest airline. Now it is how to maintain that status. That is the airline Willie Walsh inherits today. He is an aviation veteran who has officially taken charge as Indigo's new chief executive officer. Walsh has spent more than 4 decades in the industry. His journey began in the cockpit as a pilot with Aer Lingus. Ireland's national airline. Years later, he returned to lead it as CEO. From there, Walsh moved to British Airways. He went on to build the International Airlines Group by bringing together British Airways and Iberia. Most recently, he headed the International Air Transport Association. That's the organization that represents around 300 airlines. It accounts for more than 80% of global commercial air traffic. Inside the aviation industry, he is also known as Slasher Walsh. The nickname comes from his reputation for making tough decisions and cutting costs. That experience is exactly what Indigo is counting on. Because Walsh has a lot to tackle from day one.
If your law firm is making $500,000 to $10 million in revenue and above, listen closely because this is only for.
The disruption was triggered by new pilot duty rules. They required airlines to rethink how they schedule their crews. Indigo struggled to adapt. The result? Flights were delayed, many were cancelled, and more than 900,000 passengers were affected. India's aviation regulator later found shortcomings in the airline's planning and preparedness, so it imposed a fine on the airline. Passenger confidence took a hit too. A survey done by Local Circle found that 54% of Indigo flyers reported problems with the airline's customer service during the previous 12 months. Restoring that trust could be Walsh's first big test. But operational reliability is only one part of the challenge. Aircraft deliveries remain delayed across the industry. Engine shortages continue. The weakening rupee has pushed up dollar-denominated costs for the airline. Additionally, jet fuel prices remain volatile. At the same time, competition is heating up too. Indigo's rival, Air India, is expanding aggressively. It is adding more aircraft and strengthening its international network. That means India's largest airline must fix today's problems while preparing for tomorrow's, because the biggest challenge still lies ahead. For nearly 2 decades, Indigo relied on a simple formula: one aircraft family, one cabin class, low fares, and quick turnarounds. That model helped it dominate the domestic market. But global aviation demands a different playbook. It means operating longer routes, managing wide-body aircraft, serving premium travelers, and competing with some of the world's biggest airlines. Indigo has already begun adapting, but changing at this scale takes time, and that is the transition Willie Walsh has come in to manage. Walsh rebuilt British Airways, he restructured Iberia, and he stabilized entire industry bodies during tough times. The question now is, can he do the same for Indigo?
Now, before we get to our next story, look at the map on your screen. This is the map of India. Take a good look at this. There is no ambiguity here. Not legally, not politically. This map was not drawn overnight. It was forged through the freedom struggle, nation building, decades of sacrifice. It represents a country that survived 2 centuries of colonialism and went on to become one of the world's fastest rising powers. Yet, time and again, the West gets this map wrong. Time and again. It gets India wrong. It gets Bharat wrong. Is it ignorance or carelessness, or is it simply arrogance? Now, here's why we ask. Recently, a video from Glasgow went viral. It showed Commonwealth Games silver medalist Lovlina Borgohain pointing out a distorted map of India printed on a napkin in an Indian restaurant called Mr. Singh's India, the home of curry. Ironic, isn't it? Lovlina wasn't there as part of a dinner hosted to celebrate India's success at the 2026 Commonwealth Games. But during the meal, she noticed that the map on the napkin left out India's entire northeast. The athlete who comes from Assam spoke up.
प्लीज आप लोग बुरा मत मानिए, मुझे ये थोड़ा सा बुरा लगा, ये इंडिया मैप में हमारे नॉर्थ ईस्ट नहीं है। बाहर भी वहाँ लगा हुआ है कि हमारे भारत का मैप को कट कर दिया, हम नॉर्थ ईस्ट वालों के लिए बहुत, बस इतना ही बोलना था। प्लीज नेक्स्ट टाइम से ये थोड़ा सा ध्यान रखिए। थैंक यू सो मच।
It was a simple but an important point she raised. Because when a part of your country disappears from a map, the people who call it home feel erased too. And Lavlina wasn't the only one who noticed the wrong map. The president of the Boxing Federation of India, Ajay Singh, pointed out that Jammu and Kashmir had also been depicted incorrectly. He urged the restaurant to replace the map with an accurate representation of India. In response, the restaurant apologized. In a statement, the restaurant management said, and I'm quoting here, "First and foremost, we would like to unequivocally apologize for the depiction of the wrong map of India. We will take immediate steps to correct this. We will change the logo with the proper map. It was our humble privilege and honor that we served Team India after their fantastic achievements at the Commonwealth Games." So the restaurant admitted its error. It promised change. That's good. That is how such issues should be resolved. But the entire episode also leaves us with a question. How many wrong maps of India are still out there? Because this isn't a one-off. We've seen this before, many times in fact. In 2021, the World Health Organization drew criticism after COVID maps displayed distorted Indian map. India's permanent representative in Geneva, as well as Indian government officials, strongly protested this. The same year, the BBC faced backlash after airing an online broadcast with the wrong map of India. Even X, then Twitter, had to correct its platform after it displayed a wrong map of Ladakh in Jammu and Kashmir. So no, this is not just about one restaurant. It's about a larger pattern in the West of getting India's map wrong. Back in 2011, the United States State Department had to withdraw maps after India objected to inaccurate depictions of Jammu and Kashmir. Fast forward to this year. The US Trade Representative's office posted and then slyly deleted a post on X featuring the official map of India. The map showed you the entirety of Jammu and Kashmir, not the distorted map it usually uses. So it was a clear departure from Washington's long-standing practice of marking the map wrong. But for some reason, that post of the correct map was taken down. Now, this certainly wasn't the first time the United States found itself in a map controversy. Just last week, the US State Department displayed an incorrect map of Africa. During a presentation on HIV/AIDS program, several African countries were mislabeled. Washington later called it an unfortunate error. But here's the point. A country's map isn't just a graphic, it's a matter of sovereignty. Try printing a map of France without Corsica, or an American map without Alaska, and see how quickly it stops being called a design error. So if you're representing a country, especially one you claim to celebrate, the least you can do is get its map right. Ironically, this incident in Glasgow restaurant happened as the Indian delegation celebrated India's best ever Commonwealth Games boxing campaign. 10 medals, 7 golds, 3 silvers. They've just shown everyone what India looks like. The least the world can do is print it correctly.
With that last segment, I actually think they have a very valid point. I do think they have a valid point. It does seem like deliberately there are efforts made to undermine uprising minority countries like India. If you are going to draw their map, this is verifiable. A quick Google search, AI would have been able to provide the accurate map. I do commend the people for acknowledging the mistake and for apologizing publicly about it. I think that was the right move. But I do understand the feeling that the Indians may have, as this lady presented. It's a sign of disrespect, as if to say you only recognize us in a certain way, but you're not fully recognizing all our land. And there are people that's being cut out of that. If the map is not being depicted in an area where someone lives, then you're saying that place essentially has no connection to the country. And I think, it's valid. I mean, I believe if you are running countries, westernized, organized countries, there's more than enough capable people to be able to get an accurate depiction of a map. And if it's happening over and over again, it may be an indirect sign that maybe there isn't that much respect for that country or their sovereignty their territorial sovereignty. You may acknowledge certain parts, but if you don't acknowledge other parts, it would be deemed disrespectful. And she made a valid point. How would the U.S. feel if a map depicted them without Alaska or without another major country that we have, sovereign authority over? We would take issue with it, and we probably would raise that concern to the parties that be. So that being said, I think it was a valid argument, and I can understand why they would feel offended by, the wrong depiction of the map. We need to do better.
Almost every day, we hear the same thing. AI is coming for our jobs. AI is making us dumber. AI is the future. And we all get swept up in the hype. But if there ever was a cautionary tale, it would be this one. 24-year-old Leopold Aschenbrenner, the man many called an AI prophet, the Warren Buffett of Gen Alpha, turned his AI reputation into a $45 billion hedge fund. Then, in a matter of days, more than $30 billion was wiped off the books. So what exactly happened? Now, to understand that, we have to go back 2 years. Aschenbrenner wasn't just another regular tech worker. He was a former OpenAI researcher who became famous after writing a 165-page essay called Situational Awareness. The essay made a bold claim that artificial superintelligence wasn't decades away. It could arrive within just a few years. And what do Silicon Valley bros love most? The idea of the next big thing to park their money. So when Leopold said AI would change the world, they didn't just believe him, they backed him with hundreds of millions of dollars. That's when Leopold started a hedge fund. Now, what's a hedge fund? It's an exclusive investment pool for wealthy clients that uses risky, unregulated strategies to beat the market. So simply put, it's a company that manages other people's money. Its job is to invest that money and make big returns. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. His fund bet big on the AI boom, on chip makers, on data centers, and on companies building the infrastructure for the AI revolution. And those bets paid off. The fund grew rapidly. And at its peak, it controlled about $45 billion worth of investments. But here's where things changed. Leopold wasn't just investing his investors' money. He was also borrowing huge amounts of money from Wall Street banks to make even bigger bets. That is called leverage. So think of it like this. If you have $100 and you borrow 400 more, you can invest $500. And if that investment goes up, your profit becomes much bigger. If it goes down, your losses grow just as fast. And that is exactly what brought Leopold's hedge fund to its knees. Suddenly, the markets turned and AI stocks plunged. And Leopold was forced to sell some of his biggest AI bets, including shares in companies like SK Hynix and CoreWeave. He had to sell them quickly and accept a lower price. Why? Because he'd borrowed too much money, and the banks wanted it back. Within days, a fund that had grown to about $45 billion shrank to around $10 billion. Now, Aschenbrenner's story has fascinated both Wall Street and Silicon Valley. To his supporters, he is a genius and a child prodigy who finished high school at just 15, became Columbia University's valedictorian at 19, worked at OpenAI, seemed to see the AI revolution before anyone else. His fund is literally called Situational Awareness. And for a while, it looked unstoppable. Before this crash, it had returned more than 1,000%, turning him into one of Wall Street's biggest news stars. But not everyone was convinced. Critics said he had never managed money before starting a hedge fund. They also pointed out that he'd earlier worked at FTX. Critics on Wall Street are now pointing to that chapter of Leopold's career as a major red flag. Why? Because you might remember the great FTX scandal of 2022. FTX collapsed in 2022 after secretly using billions of dollars in user deposits to fund risky investments at its sister trading firm, Alameda Research. When customers rushed to withdraw their money, they simply didn't have it. The money was gone. The company filed for bankruptcy. And its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, was later convicted of fraud. Now, to be clear, Leopold has not been accused of any wrongdoing. But to many on Wall Street, his early association with FTX only raised more questions about big ideas, big leverage, and too little risk control. For many experienced investors, this was always going to end bad.
As you can see, I have full coverage. I have a premium policy. I love my coverage and I love my insurance company, but I was paying a lot and I didn't even realize it.
It's about us. Every technology boom creates a new set of heroes, people who seem to see the future before everyone else. And too often, we start believing that if they're right about the technology, they must be right about everything else too. But those are two very different things. Look at Elon Musk, look at Mark Zuckerberg, look at Bill Gates. Every generation has had its so-called tech prophets. People who change the world, big, extraordinary companies, and start shaping the way we think about the future. And that is precisely when we stop seeing them as people who can go wrong. So let this entire episode be a reminder that every technology boom creates heroes, but no one is infallible. They are human after all.
I want to weigh in on this last story. This young man is indeed brilliant. I mean, he's accomplished a lot in very little time, and he was able to write essentially an op-ed, if you will, and get a lot of people with money, fund managers, to see into the case that he was making. He sold them on where he believed AI was going to go, and people who had money and wanted quick returns bought in. Now, initially, I think it was within 6 months of earning the funds, he was able to be right on some of his predictions and made a lot of money. And I think when the crowd saw that, they doubled down and said, this kid's the one and he can't go wrong. And he went ahead and made, those bets. Now, the problem is, despite the fact that he had money, is he tried to then use debt. He went to the banks, and the banks kind of operate on a different model than investors. The banks, who are putting their money up, may decide to do a recall on that money and say, hey, we loaned you this money. We want it early. We want it back. Especially if the market takes a slight or they start to see something and they want to hedge their bets. That's what's going to happen. And I think once that happened, it means that he now has to liquidate positions in order to have the money to repay the banks on the loans that he took. And when the market's not doing good, and now he's losing money on the positions that he has, he's got to do it much quicker so that he can minimize his losses with the banks. And because that happened, there's $30 billion in a hole. He was managing a fund of $45 billion. And in a matter of days, weeks, if not weeks, he lost $30 billion. Just as fast as it comes in, as fast as it can go out. Now, that doesn't take away from the kid's brilliance or from his ability to raise money and to get backing. But it does show that, a lot of times we put too much emphasis on people's abilities that may not have been proven in the market. It's different if you're going to believe Warren Buffett, who has had decades of experience in investing and has seen different ebbs and flows of the marketplace and been able to navigate it. When you have a new kid, 24 years of age, kind of speculating about what he thinks may happen based on certain factors, there is a higher probability that he could be wrong. And in this case, when he is, that means there's a higher risk to whoever the institutions that are backing him. There's a higher risk to those returns. Now, they say the greater the risk, the greater the return. And initially, people made a lot of returns, which is why he was able to grow the fund from what he started with to, a $45 billion holding. But, the kid maybe lack of experience in wanting to leverage the money by getting debt and essentially getting loans to gain bigger positions showcases some level of greed on his part, and maybe not enough hedging strategies to ensure that if something went wrong with what he was betting, that he can minimize his losses. And you saw that inexperience displayed in how quickly he lost the money. Now, again, you know, he's still accomplished a lot for his age, and I'm sure this will be, you know, a learning experience. But, you know, if you're one of the investors that lost a portion of that $30 billion, you are not very happy. And, you know, and you don't know what the ripple effects will be going forward. So it goes to say, be mindful about where you park your money and how you invest it, and make sure that you, you know, are working with professionals who can advise you on what risks to take and what risks not to take. That being said, we're going to stop it here, and we're going to thank you guys for joining us for this particular show. I ask that you provide any feedback you have on the show. Feel free to leave a comment. If you're not connected to the channel, feel free to like and subscribe and stay connected, and hit the notification button so that the next time we have a video, you can be notified. And I thank you guys again for your support as we're continuing to progress and provide you with more useful information. I ask that you continue to support us. All right, guys, thanks again for your time. And until we speak again, God bless.